Okay, welcome back to another Between the Pages book chat. And today's guest is humorous fantasy author Ron Lahr. And today we're going to be talking about his Cathaldi Chronicles series. And now I'm going to turn it over to him and let him introduce himself. So take it away.
Hello. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Yes, it's funny. I write lots of humorous stuff. I write, I have a humorous science fiction book coming out later this year. I have just a humor book coming out later this year. And then the Cathaldi Chronicles are epic fantasy, but there is a lot of humor in it. I mean, it isn't goofy. It isn't, I love fantasy, and originally, about 25 years ago, I wrote the first one, Children of Cathaldi, in third person with a different lead character, and it's not funny at all. I mean, it's just straight fantasy, and I got to the end, and I didn't love it. I liked a lot of things about it, but I didn't love the entire package. So I put it away. Every couple of years, I try and rewrite it, but still third person, straight fantasy, and I never loved it, so I put it away again. And then my kids moved out. My kids grew up. I have two wonderful daughters. And I decided to try it in first person with what had been a supporting character as the narrator, and he's just a sarcastic jerk. And and it was so much fun to write. And I loved it. I mean, immediately. I wrote a couple pages the first time, and I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm doing this. And then a friend of mine was doing Nanowrimo, the National Novel Writing Month thing, where you commit to 50,000 words in November. And I thought, God, that sounds great. And I do have more free time now that I don't have kids to go to their events and take them everywhere and parent them, whatever. And so I did it, and I did 50,000 words during November, and then finished it before January, the first draft, before January, and I loved it. I mean, I rewrote it, and then eventually put it out. Indie published, so not much attention to it. Although one of my author friends, R.K. Biliou, who writes lit RPG and children's Minecraft books, the guy who did the Nanowrimo and kind of got me back involved in writing, he was looking for a new audiobook publisher, and he said, if you want, I have this friend who's got a book you should read. And then they approached me and made an audiobook, and I said, just find the most sarcastic narrator you can. And they did, and the guy really got it. I mean, he really got the character, which without that it would have been awful. I actually listened to an audiobook of a humorous fantasy novel, and the narrator didn't get it and just read it straight and boring, and it was awful. But this guy did a wonderful job. And I actually think it's better to listen to the audiobook because you can't miss with his delivery, you can't miss the funny parts.
Yeah.
He just does so well at it.
He got the nuance of it.
He did. And his name's Alan Adelberg. He's awesome. I'm so lucky that they got him to do it. And so now I like the audiobook more than the book, even though I hear the voices, of course, the way I meant them. I'm not sure everybody who reads it does. People can miss things. So I've had a few comments from people who obviously missed what was happening with the tone. And I think that's impossible with Alan's great work. But since then, I've written and put out the second one, and I'm about a week away from finishing the third draft of the third book of the trilogy. And then after that, later this year, there'll be an anthology called Tales of Cathaldi, where a bunch of authors, including myself, I have 3 stories in it, have written stories that take place in the world of the Cathaldi Chronicles. And that is a trip. I mean, some of them are using my characters. Some of them are using my settings. Some of them are doing something really different that they were inspired to do by reading the books. And that's really fulfilling. I mean, the same way it was to hear Alan perform the book I wrote. I mean, that was just surreal and awesome. It's also really neat to things I would have never come up with. One guy wrote a horror story. There's some humorous stories. There's some just very serious fantasy stuff going on. It is very fun. So all told, I should have 4 books coming out this year.
Oh, that's cool. So give us a quick overview of what the series is about.
Okay. So in my fantasy world, the gods are real. And the idea that sparked it was, so in this fantasy world where the gods exist and interact every once in a while with the earth, there can't be any atheists. I mean, there's just no denying they're real. So would there be any people who don't want to worship or follow the gods? And so as I thought about that for months, I eventually came up with these guys who do oppose the gods, and they think of it in the way of, it's like your parents. You need to move out of your parents' house and live your own life, rely on yourself. But they're very aggressive about it, and they want to weaken the gods by turning people away from them. And if they don't agree to that, then sometimes they kill them. And so in the past, the gods dealt with these guys, but it's 400 years later, they have survived. The main characters stumbled across them. And then over the course of the 3 books, the first book, they're just trying to stay alive and let other people in power know that they exist. The second book, the Cathaldi, it's called Assassins of Cathaldi, and as you might imagine, they start killing a lot of people. They're great infiltrators. And then in the third book will be called Destroyers of Cathaldi, and that's the final confrontation. So they're basically, the impetus for the heroes is, if they can't stop the Cathaldi, then the gods will intervene against, and a lot of people will die. To make sure they've killed the Cathaldi, this time they're going to wipe out a lot of people. So that's basically it.
Well, that sounds interesting, actually. So,
thank you.
So tell us a little bit about the sarcastic main character,
Dirk. He's a youngish thief. It's his best friend who works as a king's warder, kind of protecting the borders, who stumbles across the fact that the Cathaldi still exist. And it's his best friend. He wants to help him, and he gathers other people. And Dirk is very politically incorrect. He's not a racist. He hates everybody. Well, he thinks poorly of everyone besides himself, but he makes rude comments about dwarves and everyone, humans. I think of him as, a lovable rogue. Not everyone who has read it has thought he was lovable. This one reviewer said, Ron came up with a new way to write a fantasy book, because it's basically, you feel like you're in a bar with Dirk and he's just telling you what happened. And this reviewer called him an unreliable narrator, because he's building himself up and sometimes minimizing the contributions of his friends and insulting his friends in the book, not to their face, but just writing mean things about them. And he said, it's amazing. It's quite an accomplishment. I never thought I would read a fantasy book and think it was completely different from every other fantasy book. Unfortunately, I didn't care for it. I love that review. He didn't like Dirk, and I think he is likable. I mean, he's a jerk, but I mean, we all have friends who are jerks, and we still find something in them to like. However, he didn't. In the second book, though, Assassins of Cathaldi, you meet Dirk's family, his siblings, and his mother. He gets in a relationship which he has never done, because he's kind of a womanizer and doesn't treat women particularly well. So I feel like, you get to know him a lot more in depth there, and he's more well-rounded. But yeah, he's just a jerk. I mean, I love him, but I mean, I wouldn't want him in my house, I guess. But I don't know if we'd hang out, but I think it's very funny. There's a lot of asides. He's telling the story, so he'll just go off on a tangent about something, and he makes nicknames up for people. Because he doesn't really care about people, he a lot of the times won't remember their names. He'll just, they meet an old lady who's an innkeeper, and he only refers to her as Old Sour Face. And there's one guy that's with him for a long time, and he never bothers to remember his name, and it's like a point of pride now that he will not learn this guy's name, so he just calls him old what's his name, and so that's kind of where he's at. But I mean, he is trying to save the world and participate in the heroing, as he calls it, the hero business. So I mean, and he takes care of his family. You learn a lot more stuff about him in the second book, but he's not a complete worthless guy. He's just a jerk. But one author wrote about him and said, the main character or the protagonist is, God, I don't know. I have it. He said the hero is a sarcastic, antisocial jerk, which is why he's perfect. And I think that's a great way to describe it.
Yeah, well, I think it's a nice change, I mean, from all those nice heroic characters. I always like the dysfunctional characters myself. That's what I write too. Of course, mine are probably a lot more mean than yours because I write darker fiction and horror. So he
does kill people sometimes.
Yeah, but he probably doesn't enjoy it as much as mine.
Yes, he's not a psychopath, that's for sure, or at least not in that world. In today's world, he would be. You have an argument, he just kills you. That would be bad now. But I thought, well, this is different. I read a lot of fantasy, and sometimes I start reading a series, especially on Kindle Unlimited, and I'm like, have I read this before? Because there's so many familiar elements and tropes. And I thought, boy, my stuff is going to stand out. And I participate in the 50 books 20K or 20 books 50K group on Facebook.
Yeah.
Amazing group for authors. And they do these anthologies by genre. And they did one for fantasy. And I thought, oh, well, my short story, which featured Dirk, was going to get in so easily because it'll be so different. And their reaction was, this is too different. We do not want it. And I was surprised because there is so much similarity, the epic quest, which mine is still an epic quest, but what are you going to do? I will say that people tend to like it or really not like it. There's not a lot of, it was fine. It's not a bland read, I would say, where you're just like, oh, okay.
Well, I think that's actually a good thing because if people like it or they don't like it, they're having a reaction. So definitely. You're definitely doing what you're supposed to do as an author, which is evoke emotional reaction in your reader. So,
agreed. The trick is just finding the people who would like it.
Yeah,
and it's such a niche that there's not a like a Facebook group that they all belong to, or some easy way to target ads to them. It's going to be, I believe, a fairly long process.
Yeah, so that would be nice, having Facebook group all the readers. All the Arthurian readers go over here. All the humorous, snarky readers go over here.
Yeah, people who will love Ron's books.
Yeah,
that group. That would be awesome.
Yeah, well, I think that's what reader groups are for, but.
Well, yeah. Yeah, nobody has figured out one for mine. I've joined some like humorous fantasy group. They aren't. I mean, most of the time I feel like it's just somebody trying to sell something and, getting the names together so they can market to those people. But, well, I mean, slowly my newsletter group is growing. I do the story origin with a reader magnet called Dirk Goes to Church. And it's not what it sounds like. He's helping his friend who's a cleric of the god of war or a priest of the god of war. And he that got picked up by a gentleman who does audiobooks of new authors' short stories. And for free, it's all free. He just puts them up, records it, puts it on YouTube and all over. And to help new authors with some free promotion. And that was really nice to have him agree to do it because he gets inundated with stories. And he actually lost his sight for a while. And that's when he discovered audiobooks. And now he's like on a crusade to create. I mean, they're short, so I consider them audio pamphlets. But it's a really cool site. It's called talltale.tv.com. And I really I really like that guy. I mean, I really respect what he's doing. It's nice to have somebody who really is just trying to help, because as an author, you get inundated with people trying to sell you stuff, in email and on Facebook and Twitter. And this guy really is just a genuine fan of the genre, science fiction and fantasy. And I'm a big fan of his. I try and mention him a lot. But,
okay, so what was the hardest scene or type of scene for you to write in the series?
Well, that is an easy question to answer, because there is a scene in Assassins of Cathaldi where they assassinate some children. And when I finished writing it, and I knew, it was in the outline, I knew it was coming up, and I finished writing it, and my office is upstairs, and I went downstairs, and my wife's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Oh, I just am drained, and I feel awful. I just feel, dirty." Because this was, I mean, these guys just killed some children, like 8 or 9-year-olds, and they were royals. So, I mean, it was like an attack on, they were fighting the man by killing the children. And my wife said, "Well, if it was so awful, why did you write it?" I said, "I couldn't help it. It was part of the story. I had no ability not to do it. But it was upsetting and unpleasant, by far the most. I mean, a lot of characters die in my books because I don't believe, like in the Lord of the Rings, the 9 set out, and the only one who dies is a traitor. All the good guys live, and they're fighting the most powerful thing in the universe. And I always hated that. So 25 years ago, when I wrote mine, I'm like, lots of good guys are going to die. And back then, that was not so normal. Now, with George R.R. Martin, I mean, it's much more common. But at the time, it felt very new. And one of my readers, my beta readers at the time, was like, "I hate all these people dying. And you introduce a character, and in a few pages, I love them, and then they're dead." So, but those are easy compared to seeing children or writing children being murdered.
Okay, so on the flip side, what was your favorite scene or type of scene to write in the series?
Boy, that's a lot tougher. I very much enjoy, at the beginning of each book, Dirk just talks to the readers first. And those are very fun. I mean, it's very meta. I mean, he's in the second book, it opens up with him talking about the reviews of the first book. And some of them were real reviews, and some were just things I thought were funny. And so he's like, I've read all the reviews, and it hasn't made me think any better of people. And so he rebuts the reviews, and I really enjoy that stuff. I think it's very funny, and it's at the beginning of the book, so it's not interrupting the story. It's just setting the tone and the feel of things. So probably those are my favorite. And when I went to write the third one, because I write an outline, and then I write pages of notes. Some of it are snippets of dialogue or things that have to happen, and I'm fitting it in to the outline. But eventually, it's pages of stuff. And I have a document for the third book while I'm still working on the second book. And as things pop up in my head when I'm taking a shower, doing dishes, or mowing the lawn, I write them in there. Well, I go to actually start the third book, and I have 3 of those beginning things. And he starts it by saying, "Look." And so, like the first book, he says, "Look, I'm not writing this to feed my ego or to get free drinks or have ladies throw themselves at me. I'm sure that'll all happen, but it's not why I'm doing this." So he always starts with, "Look, I read the reviews." Well, the third one had 3 looks, and they were all completely different, and I loved them all, so I had to figure out what I was going to do with those. But.
Yeah, it sounds like you get a little Deadpool-esque vibe going there, as well.
Yes, I mean it is similar in the sense that he's breaking the fourth wall. I mean, he's talking right to you, and it's very conversational in feel a lot of the time, and of course, colored by his worldview and take on things. So, if you don't like politically incorrect stuff, don't read it. I mean, it's not full of cursing or or sex at all, but it is there is some violence, or a lot of violence, and yet the attitude of it is, in my opinion, very adult. But I did have one person ask me, well, what age group do you think should read this? And of course, my answer was everyone should read it. Babies, everyone. But I don't know that I would give it to like a 9-year-old, because there is a lot of talk about sex. I mean, he shares his opinions on sex, even though there's nothing graphic. Even when it's not a sex scene, it's like, cuts away to, you can tell it's going to happen, but there's no, I cannot even imagine writing those scenes, especially as somebody else, like that would not be my strength.
Yeah, I get that. It's not my strength either. So your main character is obviously very quirky. Are there any secondary characters that are comparable, or are they all just sort of foils to him?
Well, that is an interesting question. I think they are. That one reviewer who used the unreliable narrator said, because it's so much about Dirk, you don't get a lot of character development on the other characters, because he's only telling you about them when they're interacting with him. And I'm like, well, that's kind of a potential pitfall when you're doing first person or writing in first person. But other people have said, oh my gosh, I loved, this priest. I loved this dwarf. I believe there are multiple characters that stand out and are interesting. And of course, Dirk's commentary on these people. There's one knight that's with them, and he makes so much fun of that guy that I feel like you get a real feel for what the knight is like, Sir Arios. And I really like him. And so when I write short stories for either the anthology or for submissions to other places or the reader magnets, I always put in at least one of these other characters with Dirk, because I really love those characters. None are as unique as him. I mean, he's the only one that gets, in my opinion, if not fully realized by the end of the third book, pretty close to fully realized.
Yeah, it's hard to get the secondary characters their page time when you're writing first person. I know that. My current series is first person. Yeah, I'm in the middle of trying to figure out how to do a full blown epic battle first person and give all the other characters their screen time. So
yeah, I don't even try. Dirk just gives his impression. He loses sight of people. He'll there's a break for a second and he'll see one little thing. But yeah, I did not. I mean, you can't cut away because he's telling the story. If he didn't see it, then it didn't happen. I mean, at the end, he might go, they told me this happened, or supposedly this happened, but, I didn't see it. So in one way, it's not very real to him. Obviously, he's the most important person in the universe, so the stuff that happens to him is the most important stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so you write in fantasy. You've mentioned sci-fi and straight humor. Are there any other genres that you would like to try your hand at?
Well, I mean, sure, I would love to write the great American novel, and I have an idea for a trilogy for it, but it is daunting. And I love genre fiction. I love humor. I write the things that I love, I don't write to market for sure, obviously. But a serious piece of literature, it's a coming of age trilogy, and that's been daunting. It's much easier for me to write the fantasy, the science fiction, and the just humor, straight humor. I mean, my science fiction novel I wrote with a friend, it's called You Get What You Steal. That was just a blast to write with somebody else. I really enjoy that. I really enjoy collaborating.
Great title, too.
Thank you. I came up with the title. I'm going to call him after this and just give him credit. No. And then And then the straight humor book is awful. Oh my gosh. So, all right, I was married to my practice wife for like 15 years. Or we were together for 15 years. I don't remember how much of it we were married, but most of it. And then she left and left the kids, just had to get away from us. I mean, it was kind of a midlife thing for her. So I started dating eventually, and I was dating this one woman, and she said that something like, "You don't know anything about women." And I said, "Well, that's ridiculous. I have a great relationship with my ex-wife. We had a very pleasant, successful divorce. I have a great relationship with my two daughters. I have a great relationship with my mom. I'm like a genius at talking to women." And so then I thought, I will write a book about that, and then I will be a published author about talking to women, and I will win all the arguments. And so I wrote a book, and it became just awful. I mean, and the narrator of this pretend self-help book that no one should ever follow any of the advice in it was the precursor to Dirk. I mean, I actually wrote this book before I did Children of Cathaldi, and it's called You're as Stupid as You Are Fat, How to Talk to Women. And I believe that title captures the feeling of the book. I mean, the guy is just awful. He says awful things about women. He says awful things about everything. Well, not race, but yeah, he's really bad. Dirk is like a nice version of this guy. And I published it under a pen name because I didn't want it to be associated with my name at all. And now I'm not working. I was an IT and ERP software consultant, and I'm like, oh, I can't have this associated with my name. And I mean, I was on the board of an arts and cultural center and the Chamber of Commerce, so I couldn't have this just crude thing out there. Well, now I'm not doing any of that, and I'm like, who cares what people think of me? So it sold, I don't know, maybe 1,000 copies with me doing nothing over the years, just because the title would grab people. And I'm rewriting it to make it, hopefully, just tone down the awfulness, and it'll be by me and the pen name guy. And that book, embarrassingly enough for me, came out very easily. I am apparently an awful person inside. And so, yeah, I mean, at least the characters in You Get What You Steal aren't awful.
Yeah. I'm not sure authors should be judged by what they write, because if people judge me on what I wrote, I'd be a serial killer. So, yeah.
Exactly. But, I mean, I can't help that awful things pop into my head, like the sequel to You're as Stupid as You Are Fat, How to Talk to Women, which I never wrote, and I hope I never do, but I would if it sold like 1 million copies, is announced in the book as, I'm glad you're infertile because I think you'd make an awful mother. I mean, that's just the worst. I mean, these are such awful things to even have pop into my head, but I think they're hilarious. So what are you going to do except share them with the world?
Okay. On that note, I think we'll wrap it up, and I'll let you tell everyone where they can find you and your books.
Well, my books are only available on Amazon because I'm enrolled in Kindle Unlimited. And my website, which I put down here, Cathaldi.com, that has all my links, for Facebook and Twitter and my email newsletter, where I do a serialized Dirk short story called Dirk, or Hired by Dwarven Royalty. So the main dwarven character in the novels is also in that short story. And all sorts. I mean, my newsletter's long. It's got what's going on in my life and characters from the books write articles. And so all of that you can find there. That's the easiest place to find me. My email address is there, all that stuff. And I love for people to contact me. So please do.
Okay. So I'd like to thank you for being here today and being a guest. Thank you. And please join us this weekend for more authors and 2 more shows. So that's all for now. Bye.
Thanks again.